Hello and welcome back. If you've been here before, if you're new here, my name is Hannah and I'm a travel and nature photographer. And today I wanted to share with you my top 10 favorite photos that I took in 2024. And can I just say, I feel like time is passing so much faster than years previous. And I really can't figure out why that is. Maybe it's because every year I get older and time just passes by more quickly. I don't know, maybe you can relate, but if I had a pause button, there are many moments that you'll see here today that I wish I could have paused. And I shared a lot of these trips and experiences here on YouTube and also over on my Instagram. And my favorite photo out of all 10 of these, if you follow me on Instagram, you probably already know. But my favorite photo I worked very hard for, like over 6 months. 6 months worth of tracking this critter. Okay, I don't want to give too much more away. So let's get into number 10. It's this photo of a bull elk that I took back in October in Yellowstone. And I love this photo for a few reasons. The park had just gotten some fresh snow, so you can see that on the higher treetops. And the cold temperatures really contributed to the definition of this theme that you see in the background. But when I first showed up to this spot, I couldn't really find the composition that I was looking for. To be honest, all I really wanted was to photograph this bull elk on his own. And as I was moving around the scene, trying to kind of isolate him from the rest of the herd, female elk tended to get in the way, or the steam wasn't necessarily right behind him, which is what I was looking to do. And eventually I walked far enough down the road and found this composition that I really, really love. And number 9 is this slow shutter photo that I took in October in Jaipur, India. And this photo sticks out to me from really a lot of my photos that I took on that trip to India. And little backstory, I had just come off of a very relaxing trip, entirely opposite really of what this India experience was and was going to become. And so as I was standing on this street corner, I was just kind of observing this man across the street, watching him kind of organize his fruit stand, dress it, do his normal everyday things. And his normal everyday things were what I wanted to document. I love nothing more than walking the streets of India and just documenting things that are normal to the people that live there, but are a story to me. And so as I was watching him, I really thought about how could I freeze this moment in a way that feels authentic to my storytelling, but also authentic to the moment in time that we were both existing in together, if that makes sense. And so I slowed my shutter way down and took a bunch of different photos really of this scene, and none of them were really what I was looking to capture. Sure, you have like the slow shutter motion of the motorbikes going by, but then as the rickshaw was entering the scene, this photo just came together perfectly. It was perfectly timed, both the rickshaw, myself, and the man dressing his fruit stand. Plus, you have the colors of the rickshaw, the architecture in the background, the walls of the fort as they go up the hill, and then the subject, who is the man simply dressing his fruit stand. And to me, this is the essence of Jaipur. This is the essence of India. This just sticks out in my mind as one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken in India. Number 8 is this photo of a pygmy owl that I took in Wyoming. And I placed the pygmy owl in this white space pretty intentionally because I felt like if the owl had been in the greenery, it would have gotten lost kind of in the mix of all of that. And so by it being placed in that white space, you're still getting a sense of place, a sense of its habitat. And then you have that soft evening glow coming from the right side, really just giving it a beautiful highlight. And so the way this all works together, the environment, the light, and the pygmy owl itself really stuck out to me in these sets of photos that I took. And I'll show you this one really quick as well. And it's a photo of that same exact moment. I had just moved a little bit further to place the owl straight against the blue sky. And I like this photo. It just doesn't really give me any sort of sense of place. And so that's why I chose this version of this photo of the pygmy owl as my favorite. Number 7, also known as Windows XP. I live in Western Washington, and in Western Washington, our winters are often rainy and gray. In Eastern Washington, where this photo was taken, their winters aren't so gray, aren't so rainy. It's a bit drier, more arid over there. But this photo was taken in early spring, and in early spring, our wildflowers and other trees and things like that aren't necessarily blooming. So whenever I'm in need of a sunshine kick, I go over to Eastern Washington. This was one of those times. And when I pulled up and saw these green hills and wildflowers and blue skies and sunshine, I was elated. I don't even think there's a better word for it, to be honest. And so as I was climbing the trail and just getting a little bit deeper into these hills, these scenes just kept unfolding and revealing themselves. And I took so many photos of these hills, but this one in particular sticks out. I love how the leading line takes the viewer through the photo, and you also get those hits of purple wildflowers. I just love how it all kind of plays together. And I took a vertical photo as well. But to me, landscape photos of scenes like this really allow for the viewer to step inside the photo and get a feel for what it might be like if they were there too. Number 6 is this photo of a motorcycle in Peru. And this morning in particular was the start of the Salcantay Trail. So we had driven from Cusco to this small mountain village to have breakfast before starting the trail. And as I walked outside from having breakfast, I got a little distracted by a very cute dog that was just begging to be pet. And so I spent probably way too much time petting this dog. Every dog I see anywhere makes me think of my dog, thus I must pet it. After I managed to peel myself away from this very cute dog, I turned the corner and saw this scene, the subject of this scene being the motorcycle. And what drew me to this was my curiosity, and it was my curiosity of this motorcycle. It was, who rides this motorcycle? Where do they live? What's their story? And that's something I will never know, but I now have a photo to commemorate my curiosities of this very scene in Peru. We are now in the top 5, and there is no better way to commemorate the top 5 of 2024 than with this photo of 2 grizzly bear cubs in a sow in Yellowstone. I took this photo back in October, and it was another morning I was out trying to photograph wolves. I knew the day before they were on a carcass not too far from this area that I was in, and so I was trying to predict their movements of maybe where they'd cross the road or where they would return back to their rendezvous area, but I did not photograph wolves this morning. And so I'd been out already for quite a few hours, as you do when you're in Yellowstone, and I had pulled over and was going to go take a look one last time to see what I could see. A raven landed next to my vehicle, and so what did I do? I took many photos of this raven. It was beautiful, and truly, I love ravens so much and what they represent, especially to the GYE. And so after I was done taking photos of this raven, I got out of the vehicle and walked along the road, not too far away from my car, safe distance, and just kind of looked around to see if I could see any movement. And what I saw was a brown hump moving through some really tall sagebrush. And I thought to myself, oh, bison, yeah, that seems to add up because there were a lot of bison in the area. Well, soon this brown figure popped out in the middle of the road, and it ended up being a grizzly bear, and behind her were 2 cubs. So they eventually crossed the road, and I lost them in a drainage. But on the other side of the road where they had crossed to, there were actually some bison. And so the bison ended up taking off running, which to me signaled, okay, this grizzly bear is on the move. And sure enough, she was. She crested the hill and started to walk along the roadside in the sagebrush, and her 2 cubs were so curious. They'd stop every so often and pop their heads up and just kind of like put their noses to the air and see what was happening. This was all new to them. I'm pretty sure they were cubs of the year, so they were pretty new, and one of them was the runt, who was definitely much smaller than the other cub. They eventually continued along the roadside and many other people flocked. There was a proper bear jam. Eventually they crossed the river and went up to higher ground, and I lost them as they headed up. And it was a special moment. I had, I'd say, maybe 3 or 4 moments to myself, just me and these 3 grizzly bears, and there is nothing like it. This photo is my favorite out of the hundreds I had taken for a few different reasons, and mainly that's because it's an environmental portrait. I had taken some proper bear portraits, but I didn't feel that it really grabbed the viewer into the environment that I was photographing. So I love that this encompasses the gray sky, the sagebrush, and then the 3 bears. And you have the bear in the center, and that cub was my subject. This one was super curious, constantly sticking its nose in the air, standing on its hind legs, and just trying to understand what us 2-leggers were. And then you have the one on the left who was a bit more reserved and was also significantly smaller than the bear that's standing on its 2 hind legs. And then you have the mom on the right, who honestly could have cared less about my presence. And it was very clearly a seasoned bear jam veteran. Getting into the top 4. This photo of the 2 otters, which I titled You and Me because it reminded me of me and my mom. And it's of this sea otter and her pup. And female sea otters and their pups typically hang around on their own or with other female sea otters and their pups. And this one was just totally on its own, and it was in some really big swells. So on the west side of Vancouver Island, they're known for their waves and their storms. Well, these waves were quite big. I couldn't believe how they were just chilling. They were just laying in the waves and just rolling with it all. And it just reminds me of the resiliency of nature, of how these wild critters are so adapted to the habitats that they live in that while these waves would probably scare me, this sea otter pup and its mom were just hanging out. And if you've ever photographed anything on a boat, it's honestly a miracle that I even got this in focus, because these waves, they were so big, and the sea otter was a pretty decent distance away. So you're like on the boat and you're trying to get the photo, but I managed, and I absolutely love how it turned out. Number 3 is Golden Hour in Lamar Valley. Now, I was here waiting for some wolves to approach a carcass that they had been on the day prior. So that meant getting there at 5 p.m. because sunset around 9 p.m. in that time of year. And so I had quite a few hours to kill between the time wolves would likely approach the carcass to the time I actually arrived. And I got there early because I wanted to make sure I was in the spot to photograph the wolves. So anyways, as I was waiting, I put my long lens on my camera and sort of just searched around for different compositions, and I found this one. And what I love the most is the golden light. Now this is very minimally edited, and I love how the golden light pours in from the left-hand side of the frame and creates shadows as it sort of dissipates over the landscape. You also have the leading line throughout the whole photo, which is the road, and then you can kind of spot the car parked up in the distance, and you have the trees on the hillside. I just love this because it really encapsulates the northern part of Yellowstone. And my second favorite photo of 2024, drumroll please, is this photo of a gray wolf, part of the Wapiti Lake Pack, crossing the road in Hayden Valley. Let me tell you a brief story on this photo. Earlier this morning, I had driven through this exact area of the park, but it was completely socked in. So I had turned around and headed towards Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, where I spent the majority of the morning. I returned to this area around, we'll say like 12 p.m., 1 o'clock, and I saw up ahead a bunch of cars lining the road on both sides, and I decided to follow suit, pulled over, got out, and grabbed my camera to go see what I could see. I snapped a couple photos, and at first I thought what I saw was a bear. I took a couple more photos. I zoomed in, and at that time, the critter had lifted its head and I could see 2 triangle-shaped ears. It was a wolf. It was a few wolves on a carcass down by the river. Now, had the area not been fogged in earlier that morning, I likely would have seen a lot more movement and many more wolves, not only down on this carcass, but crossing the road. But because it was so foggy, I didn't see anything and didn't really want to stick around and wait for the fog to burn off. Well, I should have. The Wapiti Lake Pack's territory is actually divided by this road that you see the wolf crossing on. So on one side you have the pack's den area, and on the other side you have more of their territory. So what was happening was wolves were crossing the road from their den area on one side of the road to get down to the carcass on the other side of the road. And the wolves that were already down on the carcass had crossed earlier that day. So to me, that signaled more wolves were going to be crossing the road. So I camped out and stayed for quite a few hours, and eventually it paid off. In the distance of the den side of the road, I saw a black wolf moving across the landscape, and that wolf eventually crossed the road and headed down to the carcass to reunite with the rest of its pack. And eventually this gray wolf in this photo crossed the road as well. And this photo to me just shows their ability to coexist. I swear this wolf almost looked both ways before it crossed the road. I love that you can see all 4 legs and the eye contact we make and the way its tongue is hanging out of its mouth, signaling it's a bit nervous, but its tail isn't fully tucked, so you know it's a bit comfortable and it's done this before, almost as if it's not its first rodeo. And then you have the car braking, allowing this animal to safely cross the road. I just love how this exemplifies their ability to coexist. And of course, wolves are my favorite animal, so you knew this was going to be in the top 2. And my favorite photo of 2024 that takes the cake ahead of all of the other 9 photos I shared with you today is this photo of a coyote that I took right in my neighborhood. Now, this photo was over 6 months in the making. So a little backstory, I knew coyotes were in my neighborhood at one point. I was seeing their pups, I was seeing their scat, I was seeing them really everywhere at dusk and dawn until they stopped showing up. They stopped being in the neighborhood. I didn't hear them anymore, and I didn't see their scat. And then eventually I started seeing their scat again. And knowing what I know about coyotes and their movements and their patterns, I decided to bring my camera with me on my morning and evening walks when I was in the neighborhood. And one day I ended up seeing a coyote, but my battery died, so I didn't take any photos. And then it would be a couple more months until I would see this coyote. And as I was on my morning walk, I saw this coyote mousing in the field right in front of me. I truly couldn't believe it. Everything had aligned. I had my camera, my battery was fully charged, and I was close enough to this coyote to actually take this photo. And what I love most about this photo is simply the eye contact. This coyote was curious enough about me to sort of look at me and see what I was, see what I was about, see what I was doing, really just observe me until I made a very gentle movement and it jumped, got scared, and ran off. And I have not seen this coyote in this field ever since. Those are my favorite photos of 2024. And if I love these photos as much as I do, I can only imagine what 2025 is going to bring and all of the photos I will make next year. I am so looking forward to photographing new experiences and new critters and all the things. I would love to know, out of these 10 photos, which one is your favorite? I'm always so curious about what other people think of my work and why they gravitate towards certain pieces of mine. So if you could leave that down in the comments below, that would mean the world to me. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one, which will also be in 2025.